It was, you could do it a week ahead. So I used to just do a whole stream of that. Reserve like 40. And then, but when they only had one away, you could only reserve 4 times a week. So limited to that 1.5 hour. Well, that's fine. I don't swim. So if we're saying, like, my brother's I can do the biking and running club. I just can't do the swimming. Swimming is, I taught myself to swim. Yeah. And so I'm not, my freestyle is not. Yeah, but you can get across just the way it's comfortable. Someone once said, you breathe every so I'm constantly breathing. And it's because I don't swim very fast. And so yeah. But someone said, I can't believe you take 5 strokes. I've been doing this that way forever. No, it was. Yeah.
Double made Chinese. Decent amount of Koreans.
Final summary
I
deal.
was there for
And I have a bunch of stuff for anthropology, including your challenge where I
All right, let me get started. Today, we're gonna, as I kind of left off on Tuesday, with a slide on levelized cost of electricity. Actually, everyone went through it, totally understands it now. But at any rate, we're gonna go through this and talk through kind of those slides that describe how to calculate it. And then Brent, we're gonna pass out the problem that we created to do in class. Do that in teams, right, Brent? And we'll figure that out as we get to that point. But first, I want to go through this so you understand what levelized cost of electricity is. One thing I do want to caveat at the beginning, so you understand this is a very good tool. It's a very powerful tool. It's a good way to think about how much does it cost to build this power plant versus this power plant, and which one is cheaper, which one is least cost, which one would be preferable. Now, having said that, there are a lot of features in the markets that doesn't necessarily tell you which plant is more valuable. So we're going to talk about wind. We're not going to get into this issue when we talk about wind. It's one of the examples in our least cost comparison that we're going to do in the problem. But wind has this unfortunate feature of often being much more available at night than during the day. Okay, wind just tends to blow more at night than during the day. Even in the windiest regions, that's the case. And in particular, you also have this feature, particularly in the east, where we have the highest load days, the days with the highest prices, right? The wind's not blowing. So there's an issue of the value of that plant in terms of when it's available. It doesn't get picked up when you just look at the cost. Okay. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about this, and as we do these examples, that there's important caveats when you make these comparisons. And it's a little bit more complicated than just this calculation. Nonetheless, this is a good calculation. It's a very important tool. It's used all the time. Independent power producers, merchant generators, as they call them, people that build power plants to sell into the grid. They do these calculations all the time. The levelized cost, they compare theirs to somebody else's. Gee, when capital's lower, gosh, I'm able to deliver electricity more cheaply, etc. So how do you do it? Okay, so, and again, it does help you answer which new power plant choice is the least cost. Doesn't necessarily tell you which one is the most valuable given other characteristics. Okay. The first thing you want to do is recognize that with any power plant, you're going to have typically 4 major categories of cost. First one's pretty obvious. It's the capital, right? How many dollars does it cost to build that plant? That's construction costs. Sometimes it's interest costs that you roll into construction because you have to borrow some money in the short term, just during the construction period. So that's capital. The next thing you have is O&M which stands for operating and maintenance costs. And there are two types of O&M. There's fixed O&M, and it doesn't mean that it never varies. It means that it's fixed relative to the fact that the plant, how much the plant is operating. So in this case, if we use the term $10 a kilowatt year, that would mean that for a 500 megawatt plant, you would spend in operating and maintenance costs, fixed operating and maintenance costs, $10 a kilowatt times 500 megawatts, is 500,000 kilowatts. So think of 10 times 500,000, that's $5 million. That's a lot of money, but that's a big plant. So $5 million is basically, think of it as, it's the staff at the plant, right? They put it on salary. It's not overtime, it's not anything special, it's just their fixed labor every year. That's a lot of it. Also may be that every year you do maintenance twice a year, let's say. Very simple. You have to go in and clean things out, etc. And there's a fixed amount of money that's allocated for that. Doesn't matter how much you operate the plant, you'll still do that maintenance on a certain cycle. Now that's typically fixed O&M. Then there's variable O&M, okay? Variable O&M is operating and maintenance costs that vary with how much the plant is operating. So think of that as, you have a coal plant, and a coal plant has a scrubber. We'll talk more about that in the air pollution lecture. Actually, the air pollution lecture will be the air pollution video. You'll get to see, and I won't actually come and do it live, so you get to see me without a mask video. That's stated in dollars per megawatt hour, variable O&M. But if you have a scrubber, typically there's a certain amount of reagent that's used in the scrubber to basically react with sulfur dioxide, often lime or limestone, and it removes sulfur dioxide from the air. So it takes out, at most coal plants, 95% of the SO2. Takes out a lot. It's very effective. Okay. But the more you run the plant, the more coal you're burning, right? So every megawatt hour that you run that plant, it has a certain amount of dollars. That's one area of variable O&M that's pretty common. You also have, some other variable might be water that you use, and you have to constantly run it through a cooling tower, and there may be some costs for that. And it's generally small costs, but incremental. Again, the more you run the plant, the more you pay for that. So that's category 3. Then category 4 is, for a lot of plants, may be the most important, and that's the fuel cost, right? So that's stated, as we've seen with some of the data you've been looking at so far, often in dollars per million BTU, which is a measure of the cost of the fuel per every million BTUs of fuel that you use. So for example, gas is about $4 a million. A lot of coal, the liquid's around $2 or $3 a million BTU today. Oil, which would be refined if you're using heating oil, which very few plants use these days, but that might be more like $8 or $9. It's very expensive. Distillate, diesel oil, think of those types of oil. Sometimes used for turbines. Okay. And for each of these measures, the trick is that they come as an input level, the way they're stated. And now you have to convert it into dollars per megawatt hour. Because ultimately, for this levelized cost of electricity, we want to know a levelized dollars per megawatt hour. So we can look at a let's say the gas plant, come up with a number of, well, let's say $30 a megawatt hour, might be an answer, maybe 40. And we could compare it to a coal plant that might come out at 60, which is a lot of capital. Compare it to a wind plant that might only come out at 25 or 30. And they're all on an even keel. So you're putting them in terms that will be comparable. Okay. So with capital, you got dollars per kilowatt. It's a common sort of input for capital. And you multiply it by a CCR, which is a capital charge rate. Think of that as a levelization factor, right? And we're not going to get in this class into kind of the financial side of how you come up with that levelization factor. But think about if you build most power plants, certainly if you built a wind plant or you built a solar plant, most gas plants, you might use a 20-year life for that plant. So one part of the levelization factor is just depreciation, right? Over 20 years, 5% a year, right? Well, that's part of the capital charge rate. But then there's also things like, well, you pay interest, you borrow money, so you pay interest on that. You might pay 3 or 4% a year of interest on a declining basis. So when you add up all those things, so there might be things like taxes included, the levelization factor, right? You might pay property tax, you probably do, for the land you're using for that power plant, you build that power plant. And that often gets included in the capital charge rate. And typically in this class, you're going to see we're going to use 10%, 9%, we'll use 8% sometimes. And we will always tell you what to assume. For another more advanced course, you get into this, you really get into the finance side, really learn about what the real levelization factors are to use. But that's in the range of what's pretty typical. So you hit this number, this dollar per kilowatt hour, times a capital charge rate, let's say of 10%. So if this number were $1,000 a kilowatt, each year the cost would be 10% of that, or $100 a kilowatt year. Right. That's just kind of your levelization factor. Fixed O&M is already stated in dollars per kilowatt year. That's the amount of money each year you expect to spend on O&M at that point. Let's say some plants maybe $10, sometimes $30, $40, kind of depends on the technology, how much maintenance you have to do, how much staff you do in the plant, to run the plant, etc. All right, the third one is already in dollars per megawatt hour. Right? Now these two, we're going to have to convert to dollars per megawatt hour, right? They're in dollars per kilowatt year. We still need to put them in dollars per megawatt hour. I'll come back to that in a second. These are dollars per kilowatt year. This is in dollars per megawatt hour. Fuel price is in dollars per million BTU, right? Mention that. Remember I mentioned something called the heat rate, the plant efficiency. How many BTUs does it take to produce a kilowatt hour at that plant? Steam plant, not so great. Combined cycle, really good, right? Wind plant, don't really care. There's no fuel. Fuel's free, let's put it that way, right? Okay, so fuel price is dollars per million BTU. Let's say that's $2. And the heat rate is, the coal plant might be 10,000 BTUs per kilowatt hour. And that will yield the fuel cost. And if you do the multiplication, and we'll do it on the next page, a little more detailed examples, you could come out with dollars per megawatt hour. In that case, turns out 10,000 BTUs times $2 is going to yield $20 a megawatt hour. Trust me on that. We'll get into why that works. Because you're going from millions, kilowatt hours to megawatt hours, right? 1,000 on one side, 1,000 on the other side, etc. We'll get to that in a second. And then the annual capital fixed on M in dollars per kilowatt year you want to convert to dollars per megawatt hour. There you've got to assume, and you're not going to know exactly, if you're building this plant, how many hours a year do you think it's going to run? Right? Now, some of that with renewables is really an assessment of how much the wind's going to blow in that area. What kind of is the average the overall utilization of that wind generation, wind capacity that you build, right? And that might be the Eastern wind plant, 20%, 25%. West Texas wind plant, there's a lot of wind, might even be 40 or even close to 50%. Okay, so it varies. Well, there is a number that you would assume sort of that you use for your levelized cost of electricity. If you build a natural gas combined cycle plant, you're going to figure it's going to run a lot because it's relatively cheap. So you have to come up with an assessment of capacity factor. A lot of times people would do 70%, 65%, et cetera, which would yield how many hours per year. So every time you think of the capacity factor, you go to how many hours a year, and you always multiply it by 8760, right? You know, 60 hours a year. Okay, so using the capacity factor, you come up with hours operating per year. And all you're doing is basically multiplying dollars per kilowatt year with number of hours over the year, and that will end up giving you dollars per megawatt hour. Also by converting kilowatts to megawatts. So once you've got all these in dollars per megawatt hour, you sum them all up. That's the total levelized cost for that power plant. Okay. Now I didn't go through all the details of that, but I gave you kind of the big picture. Let's go to something more specific now. All right, so let's take, as I mentioned, a levelized cost calculation for a new gas combined cycle. All right. And in this one, we're going to assume it's going to operate at a 68.5% capacity factor. Why did I pick that capacity factor? Well, because I wanted to keep the math easy. And so that works out to 6,000 hours a year. So I like round numbers when we do these. And the capital charge rate is 10%. The gas price we're assuming is $4. Actually happens to be right around $4 now. That was lucky. Okay, so overall, these are kind of the key inputs. There's also the inputs of what the costs are, but these are the assumptions. What's the gas price we're going to assume? And remember, that's a gas price assumed to be the average price over the next 20 years. Right? If you're doing a levelized cost. Now keep that in mind. Typically, people use the current price. They might use a price curve and look at some assumptions, but that's obviously a key input. Right? And the heat rate 7,000 BTUs per kilowatt hour. 7,000 BTUs per kilowatt is really close to 50% efficiency. And we said 3412 BTUs in a kilowatt hour. If you did 100% efficiency, you could convert every bit of the heat energy that came out of burning fuel into kilowatt hours, which you can't. If you could, it would be 3412. Well, this is a little less than 6824 would be 50%. So it's a little less efficient than 50%. Okay. So we're going to assume here a capital of $1,200 a kilowatt. So the annual capital is 1,200 times 0.1, so 120 per kilowatt year. The fixed O&M, we're assuming $30 a kilowatt year. And by the way, obviously you can look at all this stuff later, and we'll keep a lot of this stuff up if we can on the board, so you can sort of, as you're doing these exercises, help you. All right. So total capital and O&M fixed charges equal $120 a kilowatt year plus $30 a kilowatt year, well, $150 a kilowatt year. Now I got to convert that to dollars per megawatt hour. Okay, here comes the little more complicated math, but not too bad. 150 a kilowatt year times, all right, we need the capacity factor, remember, to convert it. And we know in a year, it's going to be running 6,000 hours. So year goes on top because 150, this is like 150 divided, and Brent's going to do some of these on the board, so you'll be able to see it a little bit better probably. But 150 divided by kilowatt years. So you want years divided by hours. Get rid of the years, right? And so it's $150 a kilowatt year times year divided by 6,000 hours. And then, of course, we're going to convert to megawatts. So we multiply this by 1,000 kilowatts per megawatt. Just unitary, but we're moving the units from kilowatts to megawatts. And if you do all that math, you're going to find 150 times 6,000 divided, or excuse me, 150 divided by, or times 1,000 divided by 6,000. Those are all the numbers there to get to those units. When you do that, that's 150,000 divided by 6,000, which is $25. Okay. Variable O&M, that's easy, right? We already have an assumption of how much variable O&M is. We've already got it in dollars per megawatt hour, so that's good. Fuel, we take the, well, here we go. Already messed up here. Should be $4, but let's assume $3. Put it down here. $3 times 7,000, right? So that 7,000 BTUs per kilowatt hour. So we're getting rid of the BTUs. Of course, this is millions of BTUs, and this is just BTUs at the top. And then this is kilowatt hours below, times 1,000 kilowatt hours per megawatt hour. So if you do all the math on the numbers, including the fact that this is really 10 to the 6 BTUs, right? Not just BTUs. And this is 7 times 10 to the 3rd BTUs. You'll end up with $21 a megawatt hour. And that's something we just, again, we'll show on the board. But if you walk through all that math and the basic math there, you'll get 21. So the total cost of electricity in this example, assuming that the gas price is really $3 instead of $4, which I obviously forgot to change, at any rate, $48 or 4.8 cents per kilowatt hour. Sometimes people will show electricity costs in cents per kilowatt hour. Most of the wholesale electricity and the developers, they all use dollars per megawatt hour. But sometimes when you're down at the retail level, right, people are wanting to compare in cents per kilowatt hour, because actually when you get your bill, you will see a rate in there. And it will always be in cents per kilowatt hour. That's the only reason. But $48 a megawatt hour is the same as 4.8 cents per kilowatt hour. Difference in 1,000, right? $48 is 1,000, 4.8 cents. Okay. All right. Now let's take something very different, which is you decide you're going to build a new gas combustion turbine. Remember I mentioned that those are not very efficient. They're more expensive to produce the electricity, but they have the great advantage of something you can bring online real quickly when you have that hot day and you need capacity. And in the summer months, you see a lot of use of these turbines. And sometimes in the winter, if you've got a really cold winter snap, there's a lot of electric heat in that area. So this one we assume utilization of 5.7%. Again, that will show the hours relative even 500 hours a year. Capital charge rate 10%. Gas price $4. Once again, I repeated the 4. So gas price $3 in this assumption. heat rate 10,000, right? A lot higher heat rate, less efficient. So the capital's cheaper, $500 a kilowatt. So it's cheaper to build. Bad news is it doesn't run very much. Right? Because it doesn't run very much, we'll see in a second that the dollar per megawatt hour associated with capital and fixed O&M is actually pretty high. So $50 a kilowatt year, and fixed O&M is $10. So the total is $60. Now we convert to dollars per megawatt hour. $60 a kilowatt year divided by times year divided by 500 hours. That's 1,000 kilowatts per megawatt hour or megawatt gives you $120 a megawatt hour. Okay. If you remember the other example, that's a lot more than a combined cycle. It's all because of the capacity factor, right? You're spreading all those fixed costs, that capital and that fixed O&M, over a lot less hours, like an order of magnitude less hours, basically. Okay, so that's why you get a much higher cost. Variable O&M is only $2. Fuel $3 times 10,000. Nice easy math here. Keeping the heat rate at 10,000. So it works out to $30 a megawatt hour. So the fuel's more expensive, the capital's more expensive, capital and fixed O&M are more expensive in terms of dollars per megawatt hour, right? So the total cost of electricity is $152 a megawatt hour, or 15.2 cents a kilowatt hour. So why would you ever build a combustion turbine if its cost of electricity is about 3 times a gas combined cycle unit? Shouldn't people always just be building combined cycle units? Anyone have a thought on that? Okay, well, the answer is you can build a combustion turbine for less capital. And what you're really concerned about when you build combustion turbines, and mind you, most of the system is not combustion turbines, but there are some that are built every year. And the reason you do it is you have this cost of capacity at peak. And you know you can turn that combustion turbine on quickly. And not only that, you can build it for less than half the cost of a combined cycle plant. So it's a low capital cost. So if you're looking to, you have a capacity shortage in a region, and very often you do from time to time, you're saying, hey, I can build some combustion turbines to fill that in. Most of the capacity gets built, they're combined cycle plants, wind plants, solar plants, other things. Yeah.
Why can't you, why does the combined cycle not have as much capacity? Why can't you just turn it on?
You can't turn it on as fast.
Oh, it's fast.
And so it is available. There are 2 reasons. One is turbines a little more flexible for that. But the other reason is if all you were, let's suppose you had plenty of generation available to meet your load, but your peak loads were all of a sudden getting really hot for whatever reason, okay? What you would do is say, how can I meet that at the cheapest cost? And when you're trying to meet just peak load, if that's all you're concerned about, capacity at peak, you want to do it for the cheapest capital. That's really the big reason, but there's sort of 2 reasons. Yeah, good question. Okay, so now we're going to go to the problem. I'm going to let Brent take over here.
This is silent.
I think everyone lost.
Back up the board. That was not a yes. This is exciting. The handout. See if Thomas got the right number. Okay, let's have some excitement.
I wore my red shirt today.
Yeah, see, there he is.
I gotta be, I gotta be something.
Okay. Now, I don't know how it's gonna work for everybody online, who's listening in, so, yeah, hopefully it works okay for them. I can do the same thing. I can't really chime in. Yeah, let's chat through this, okay? So I'll just write this up on the board, but you guys are gonna have to do participation. You're gonna have to tell me what to write it there, okay? Is that all right? That's okay. We'll go through and get this correct. What would, I was trying to think of 3 keys to this thing, this calculation. Units, really important key. Keep the units straight, right? So unfortunately, it's kind of like algebra. You got to sort of keep stuff in the numerator and denominator straight. So that's one thing to do, is just keep those units straight. And second thing, what would be a second thing associated with it? At the end of the day, everything needs to be in dollars per megawatt hours, right? I mean, that's kind of the same thing as keeping the units straight, but at the end of the day, we're looking for a dollar per megawatt hour. And let's see, maybe a third thing. You implied it, Bruce, I think, but I would say a third thing is and it's again the units thing, which is the kilowatt to megawatt. So kilo is 1,000 watts, mega is 1,000 kilowatts, right? Is that correct?
Mega is 1,000.
So a mega is 100,000 watts, right? A kilowatt is 1,000 watts. A megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. That's really important to keep that straight, right? The multiplication divided by 1,000. So, okay, so let's go through it. What do we got? What the levelized cost for the alternative, number 1, the combined cycle plant. So does anyone want to tell me where to start with that one? I'm going to do combined cycle over here. Where do I start?
You just do the capital cost times the CCR.
Okay, so we start out with, let's start out with just the capital, right? We say the capital. Okay, so we take the capital cost, which is was it $1,400 per, yep. So $1,400 per kilowatt. And what did you say we do with that?
You multiply it by the CCR.
Okay, so again, remember, at the end of the day, we want something in dollars per megawatt hour, right? So we're working towards that, right? So the first thing is recognize there's no time component to this. And the magic trick is that multiplying by the CCR, capital charge rate, allows us to stick a time unit on there, basically, right?
Yeah.
So times, what is it, 0.1? So in this case, 0.1, so that's pretty easy. There's really no units on that, but it does allow us to put a per year. When we get to this calculation, that's 140 per kilowatt year, right? I'm gonna get rid of that for now, okay? So what you did?
Yeah.
Everybody did that? Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Then what? Yep.
So you're gonna add the capital cost to the fixed cost, because now they're in the same unit. And then multiply that at 1,000 to convert it from like per kilowatts to per megawatts.
Okay, I like that. So you're actually, yeah, so before actually getting to the dollars per megawatt, you're gonna add the fixed O&M, which is
Yeah.
already in dollars per kilowatt year,
Yeah,
to this number. Is that what you're saying?
yeah.
Okay, so let's put that, let's just stick that here. Bang. Fixed O&M, and that is, what was that?
That was $28 per kilowatt year.
Okay, $28 per kilowatt year, and then you're gonna do what? You're gonna add them together, because you can, they're the same units, so we can add them together, okay? So we get $148 per, what kind of get it?
60.
Thank you, 68 per kilowatt year. So you did?
Yeah. And then from there, you can convert it from years to hours, because we have the information of 7,000 hours per year. So you
Okay.
multiply it or divide it by 7,000.
Then convert So we're gonna ultimately convert to megawatt hours, but the first thing you're gonna do is do what?
Convert it from years to hours.
Right, that's using the 7,000 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, so convert, I'm just gonna write that out. From years to hours, and that's gonna be 168 per kilowatt years times 1 year over 7,000 hours, right? Because that's the number of hours it's operating that year, right?
Yeah.
Or likely to operate that year. Okay. And that's gonna give us some number. Oof. It's gonna tax my brain.
Yeah, and if it helps anybody in the same step, I also included that like 1,000 kilowatt hour per megawatt hour, just to like completely change it to the units we're looking for.
Okay, so and so we convert from years to hours and convert kilowatts to megawatts at the same time, right? So let's throw one more thing that we're gonna multiply on there. So kilowatts is down here, so I'm gonna have a kilowatt up here. And a megawatt down here, right? It's 1,000. Is that correct? So 168 times 1,000 divided by 7,000 is some number. What is that?
24.
Sounds good. Sounds so simple. And that's per megawatt hour. So we'll start canceling stuff out here just because we can. So megawatt hour, kind of megawatt times the hours at the bottom, right? And yep, that's correct. Okay, so that is the total. This is going to be the total capital plus fixed cost in dollars per megawatt hour. Okay, it's kind of half the equation so far. Yes.
What exactly does that unit mean? Is it like how long, is it like an hour of operating at 1 megawatt or?
Yeah,
how does it know?
Yeah, it's, think of it as you've levelized the cost. So as if per megawatt hour, and each hour that you're operating all the way through the years, the 20 years you're running the plant, it's costing you $24 for your capital and fixed on it. That's kind of what it means.
So where does the megawatt come into, like, is that like per,
Well, because we converted kilowatts to megawatts, basically. We started with kilowatts, right? And then we said, okay, now it's per megawatt hour. Just because that ends up being the measure a lot of people use. You could do the same calculation and end up with 2.4 cents per kilowatt hour.
So that also equals, so it's also, if we did, well,
2.4.
I just took that times, actually got it back to kilowatts, right? So we got, I divide by 1,000, right? Put that 1,000 back
And
here
multiplied by 100 on the top.
and put the megawatts up there. It's gonna be
And then
0.024,
100
right?
And then divide that by 100, you'll get the number. Or move the decimal over by 100, you'll get cents.
Which is 2.4 cents. per kilowatt hour.
So either way,
So let's do one other example on that though. So average household consumption of Ohio electricity is how much? It's about 900 kilowatt hours per month.
Yeah.
Maybe 11,000 kilowatt hours a year. Okay. So it's about 11 megawatt hours per year, right? About 1 megawatt hour per month. Is that correct?
it's all right.
So, in terms of plant, I guess that's just kind of what is a megawatt?
Yeah.
Does that make some sense?
I think a lot of reasons people use that is that it's kind of a nice round. Typically it's 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, a lot of them. You're not ending up with, 0.01 or 0.2 or whatever, So that's, I think the reason it's developed is sort of a shorthand, and that's the way the market trades. If you go into the market and you look at the prices for energy in an hour, it'll be in dollars per megawatt. So,
I just looked this up and it helped me a little bit, so maybe it'll help some people, but just to refresh, 1 kilowatt hour, it says is equal to the amount of energy you would use if you kept a single 1,000-watt appliance running for 1 hour.
correct. Let's hope you don't have too many 1,000-watt appliances, though. That's a lot.
It'd be like a microwave, right? And if you had it running.
Yeah, if you
for
kept it
10 hours.
running an hour, yeah. I hope you don't run your microwave an hour.
So that's our capital and fixed costs, right? How are we gonna get the variable costs? So one of them is already in there, megawatt hour, dollars per megawatt hour, right? So the third one is the variable. Already in dollars per megawatt hour, so that's 3. All right, that's easy, super easy. How about number 4, which is the fuel cost, it's another variable cost, right? So how are we gonna do that one?
Supply the cost of fuel, which is in million BTUs, by the heat rate, which is in BTUs per kilowatt hour.
Okay, so let's start with so we got the $3 per million BTUs, right? Times the heat rate,
Yeah,
okay?
which is 7,000 BTUs per kilowatt hour. So you can cancel out BTUs. Then you're gonna convert kilowatt hours to megawatt hours by multiplying by 1,000. So then you can cancel out the kilowatt hours. And get your answer, which is 21 dollars per megawatt hour.
Okay, so there we go. So now we got $21 per megawatt hour, so we've got total variable cost of kind of the combination of those two, right? Say DC for that variable cost, all right, so it's 23 plus 21 is gonna be 24 per megawatt hour, and so the total levelized cost equals 24 plus 24, right? Per megawatt hour in both cases. 48 megawatt hour. Okay, is this right, Bruce?
Yep.
Okay, one other, let's do the wind power real quick. Really quick about it. But it is quick, because it's easier, right?
Yep.
So wind power. That's the same thing, right? So let's just start. We've got 4 things we want to pay attention to, but we don't have to actually account for 3 of them, because we don't have fuel costs, fuel street, right? So we'll start again on the wind power one with the capital cost and making the conversion there. So what is it, $1,000 per, what's it, per kilowatt? Times 0.1, gives you $100 per kilowatt year, right? Then what do we do? Multiply by. Okay, so on this one, so since we have this, we're then gonna also then add in the first, the fixed O&M. Okay, we'll do that. Yep.
Just to be clear, the CCR has a unit of here.
I usually don't put a year on that thing. I just do this. Bruce, would you put a per year on that? On the capital charge rate? I usually don't think of it.
Yeah, I mean, you could, but I usually don't. I know that it's my levelization factor. To have charges per year.
It's what it does.
Yeah.
But usually we don't put the, I usually don't put- you could think of it that way, you put per year on there. Right, I mean, that's basically what you're asking, should I put the per year on there, right?
I was just making sure, because like logically, the year comes from somewhere. So.
That's right, that's essentially where it comes from. Okay, so then the second one is the fixed O and M, and what's that for this wind power thing? 5, all right. So that 5 over here. Total was 105. This one, then we want to convert that to what, dollars per megawatt hour, so how many do that? So this poor thing only operates for how long? 2,000 hours per year. We're gonna use that in here, right? So we multiply this $105 per kilowatt year by 1 year divided by 2,000 hours, right? And then we're gonna do our 1,000 kilowatts per megawatt. Conversion 105 divided by 2,000.
Multiply by 1,000, so
Multiplied by 1,000 is
105. 52.5. 52.5.
awesome. See, I had that already done. The megawatt hour, right? So we're gonna cancel these things out. Kilowatt canceled out, the year canceled out, hours stayed in there, megawatt hours. 52.50 for that one. And the next one's even easier, right? Because we don't have to worry about the fuel cost, and we already have the, this variable cost is already $1 per megawatt hour, it's 1, right? That's the variable O&M. And so the total cost is the sum of those two things. So 52.50. Put it on there. So 52.50. So in this case, the sad sack wind power plant doesn't stand up, does it?
Close.
Dang it.
However,
The wind revolution has not entered into.
now it's a low wind capacity factor.
Okay,
So
so
that
this is,
number, let's suppose that number was 4,000. The ones in West Texas where the wind blows a lot. Okay, and that number literally half.
so this is, so see what the point is this is only what, 25% of the year, 2,987 less than 25%, right?
Yeah.
This is saying that if you've got a wind plant out in Texas, it's, the wind's blowing pretty hard 50% of the time during the year, so you're actually done.
That's kind of a max, right? Yeah. Yeah,
So what would the average be for capacity like that?
there, I would say the average is probably in the 30 or 35%.
So
So
it's
the
still,
20% is like 25% is more kind of what you would get in some of the big plants in Ohio or areas where it's, not the ones in the lake. The 30, 35. 50 is really good. That's like state of the art level.
And West Texas is usually the best spot for that.
What's that?
West Texas like the best spot.
West Texas, also with the newest wind designs. I mean, the big thing is the materials of the wind plants have improved such that even the fairly low winds will spin. And so it gives you better capacity factor. Yeah,
So if we calculated it with 33%, which if my math is correct, would be 2,891 hours. That's, the total cost would be 3732, which is lower than the combined cycle.
yes, yeah. So
so you can see.
So there's a lot of
huge, but this is a huge effect, right? Huge effect. You Start to see things that affect it. Let me go here, you have a question.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask what the capacity, how it compares between offshore and, like, more inland.
offshore can be a lot better. The only problem about offshore is the capital costs a lot. So it's a balancing act. You know, they've been putting ones more in the North Sea, clearly, that are offshore. Part of the reason they're doing that is their capacity factor. So
So you're getting closer to
But-
8,700.
but they are also going to put in cables up the ocean. You can imagine how expensive that is.
So, I think, so the other interesting thing on these calculations that you can start to see is what factors affect. I mean, if you're thinking about how you're gonna, building plants or something like that, you start to see what factors actually affect these decisions, right? It's the capacity makes a huge difference, the heat rate over here makes a huge difference, right? I mean, you cut that down by 25%, these costs go down a lot. as well.
My cycles will affect the fuel costs.
Fuel costs now.
Fuel cost is high. Today it's $4. I mean, when we did this example, it was less than 3. It's actually 2 last year.
Yeah.
So it makes a big difference what you assume the next 20 years of natural gas costs. Pretty high.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So what affects the competitiveness of the wind power is not just the importance of this, but it's the importance of that as well, the fuel cost, right? So if you're, if we're in a world where natural gas is becoming more, scarce, prices are going up for it, then it makes all of these sort of fuelless power sources, right, like wind, a lot more competitive. I don't know, to me, that's another component of this. I guess it's levelized cost, the way of thinking about it, you start to decompose the problem and start thinking about how and why. See for yourself exactly why they'll become more competitive or less competitive under different economic conditions, right? That's useful.
This is why when people plan, and the utilities used to be the planners, but now it's the merchant generators and others who are in the markets. They plan with a lot of assumptions. They plan with a lot of scenarios, right? What if fuel prices are really high? What if, we're wrong about the wind capacity factors we think we're going to get, and it actually ends up being not as good. That type of thing. So because it makes a big difference.
Okay, so is the calculation okay? I mean, you guys okay with the calculation? And that's you are going to have to do that on next homework. There's this example, we've got a few other examples online that you can actually look at and play around with and calculate yourself. Okay. Let's see, we've got the other problems on here which are interesting to think about, which we need to think about. Look at though, I wanted to come back to one other thing. So I was asking Bruce, what's the size of one of these natural gas combined cycle plants? Or how big would that plant be? said
It could be
500, you said 500
The
megawatts.
big one would be 500 megawatts. Yeah.
Okay, so 500 megawatts. So how costly is this plant? So that's 1 point. So it's $1,400 per kilowatt, right? So it's $1.4 per megawatt, right? So am I right on that? Doesn't seem right. No, it's 1.4 million. I went the wrong way, sorry. So it's actually 1.4 million per megawatt, right?
Yes.
Times 500 megawatts, which is kind of the size of what you plant. So that's going to be something like $700 million to grow it. Okay. Can you give me one asset in Ohio that's worth $700 million? Can you give me one asset on this campus that's worth $700 million?
Several of our buildings, you can find the real estate values of
Which
like.
which
maybe-
1 billion? Which one building is worth $700 million?
Like half of the shoe.
Which the shoe?
No, it probably costs so much to build it. Probably costs like $1 million to build.
You have to sell the
Stadium's
shoes,
cheap.
but when you sell it.
No, I'm just talking about the value of the shoe.
The shoe's probably worth actually more than that.
You know,
Probably. I don't know. The seating in there is kind of crap. It's not like, you know. Yeah, the seating's kind of crap. It's not worth $1 billion. Maybe it's worth $700 million. Right? But anyways, that's what they paid for the Wexford Medical Center. It was exactly $725 million to build it. That was not the one they're building right now, the previous one. The one they're building right now is 1.7 billion. Stuff goes up over time. Okay, you know, and another fact I found out is that this is about the value of the Cleveland Indians, the Cincinnati Reds are like $2 billion.
What'd you say?
Just kidding. But that's a lot of money, okay, think about it, that's a lot of money, so if you're American Electric Power, right? If you're American Electric Power, and you're gonna build one of these things, you have to raise $700 million to actually do it, right, that's not chump change. Right, that's a higher, big rig to do that. We're gonna come back to 2, 3, and 4, I'm gonna put the solution to this up online, we'll come back and talk to 2, 3, and 4 on Tuesday. A little bit, all right? Homework's due, right, tonight, midnight?
yeah.
Next one.
Yeah.
Next one.
I calculated the average fee, this is like national dollars. Let's say like.
So how's the physical year? I know it's not going to be shipped to pieces. I've been talking to some ESP that just had the one guy insurance and then so I'm just wondering, have you ever done like work directly with the PWC? Your time there? PWC, Pricewaterhouse.
Yes.
Do you know anything about their like sustainability insurance?
They do all sorts of different.
Yeah. Definitely. I know that they're the division of the 40 people now, it's growing super fast. All sustainability stuff, so that's kind of where my head's at for next summer, hopefully. Definitely, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.